Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning, bright and early. Our hope today is to get through the meeting in about 2 hours. Yesterday we were able to do that with the technical working group, so we're going to try and move you out and give you half an hour back of your day. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Bill, if you want to start us off with the safety moment, that'd be terrific.
Thanks, and I'm going to steal Brian's from yesterday since it is Parade Thursday, so safety for the parade. So one thing is I'm looking out my window and seeing the parade route below my window. Arrive early. It looks like there are people already lining up along the street. Have a meeting spot if you're in a group, because there's going to be, since the crowds are going to be so large today. Stay behind the barricades. There's nice orange barricades all over 17th Street and Broadway, so you can easily figure out where those barricades are. If you do see something, say something. If there's a package or something that's, looks suspicious, again, try to find a police officer or security person. Bring food and water, and shade today might be a good thing, at least hats. Dress for the weather, sunscreen, and of course, if you have kids with you, make sure you have a buddy system. So there's your safety tip for the day.
Fantastic. Thank you, Bill. A pretty tight agenda today. We're going to start with a review, just an update on the system optimization plan and where that stands right now. We're going to give you an update on the mobility plan for the future, and we'd like some dialogue and feedback from you. Julie will help us through a couple of key questions, and we reviewed those with the technical working group yesterday as well. So we'll tell you a little bit about what we heard from them, and then an update on the schedule. So jumping right in, when we're talking about that system optimization plan, it's really setting the stage for the future of RTD. And we're talking about what we were really trying to do with accomplishing the system optimization plan was making sure that the service levels, of course, matched how much money RTD had to work with and the workforce that they had available. We were really trying to clarify service priorities with that process, improve some efficiency, and then setting the framework for the mobility plan for the future and for how RTD grows over time as demand for the system and service grows and our population in the region grows as well. So the system optimization plan was, we had an opportunity to provide that to the board of directors in the middle of June after we had the public comment period. We made some updates based on what we heard, and we have put all of that information together in what we refer to as the system optimization story map. And so on this next slide, you'll see the story map. We sent this out to you as part of CEO Johnson's letter stating that, to the board that the final draft had been presented to the board. So if you're interested, Sebastian's going to click on this link and we're going to show you the story map. I'm going to do this really quickly just to show you what's out there. And please feel free to go to the link and dig into the information. But basically the story map just gives you an overview of the system optimization plan, tells you a little bit about the process that we went through to develop the system optimization plan. It tells you the public engagement process that we went through, summarizes all of the over 1,600 comments and the responses to the comments that we received, gives you a little bit of the analysis on the SOP, and then it gives you the final SOP that you can dig into in a little bit more detail. So as you can see that Sebastian is scrolling here. This is a good one to highlight. Thank you. We had several questions on Title VI and equity as we went through the process. So we've developed this white paper, and feel free if you have questions on Title VI, on how it was applied to the SOP, how RTD applies it in general. This is a great area to stop and spend a little more time on and understand what happens through that Title VI analysis. And then scrolling down, there's really two tools on here. We'll talk a little bit more about this interactive tool. This is a tool that you can dig into and do some comparisons of the sub-regional areas if you're interested, but I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on this today. But do dig into it if you're looking for more information. And then we'll scroll down one more here. This shows all of the routes in the system optimization plan. Here's the core routes. You can dig in and find more information about those, the connect routes. You can click on these links and get information on every single route in the system optimization plan, the recommendations that were made, what was there previously, so that you can really understand what the recommendations are. And then if we scroll down one more, there's an interactive map through a tool that we use to develop the system optimization plan called Remix. And Remix is, if you zoom into a particular area, you can click on a specific route, find out more information about that route. If you're interested, there's also a tool that they refer to her as Drop Jane, and she's this little icon down here on the bottom right that looks like yep, there she is. You can drop her anywhere within the RTD district, and it will tell you how far Jane can travel by foot and on transit throughout the entire district in a 15-minute time period, and a 30-minute time period, a 60-minute time period. So you can figure out how far Jane can move with the current system optimization plan that we're recommending here. So that's also a pretty interesting tool if you want to see from your own house where you can get to. I think it's a pretty great tool. So that's the system optimization plan in a nutshell. And I do want to just take you through a little bit of analysis as well that we did for the system optimization plan. The sub-regional councils, which I mentioned as we were going through that story map, you'll recall that there are 5 of them. And we met with you all as a group and the technical working group in those 5 areas to review the draft system optimization plan, get feedback on those recommendations, and then make adjustments to them. We were also able to do a fair bit of analysis for the recommended system optimization plan by these sub-regional service councils. So on this next slide, you'll see the first set of bars that we look at here are population in each of the sub-regional service councils, and then equity zone population. So the top is population by service sectors. The bottom is equity zone population. That's the first column of bar charts there. The second column of bar charts compares how much bus service is provided to each of the sub-regional service sectors on a per capita basis. And then the bottom bar chart does a per capita basis, but on the equity zone populations. And then the final set of bars talks about how much access do we have to stops that are in the system optimization plan, how many people in the district have access to 15-minute or better service, how many people have access to service, and then the equity zone population, how many people have access to service that are considered equity zone population, and then how many people have access to 15-minute or better service. It's a whole bunch of data, all of that to say what we were trying to get to from guidance from you all and from the technical working group was really prioritizing that high frequency backbone service and prioritizing service to social equity populations. And what you'll see here as you dig into this data is that we have improved access to everyone and specifically to social equity population groups to that 15-minute or better service in all of the sub-regional districts. So we've set out to do what we accomplished, what we looked to accomplish, which was improving that service and that backbone network. Next steps when it comes to the SOP, we will be back to the board of directors. It's actually the Operations and Safety Committee with the final SOP on July 13th, and then looking for board action to adopt the system optimization plan on July 26th. So that was a whole bunch. If we have, Julie, are there any comments that have come through or? chat?
Nothing in chat.
Okay,
We put the link in the chat if anybody's interested in the tool that Holly just walked through.
wonderful, thank you.
Questions on the SOP, anyone? Well, feel
feel
free
like
if
there's-
you think of something, let us know. Sorry, go ahead, Holly.
Yeah, there's a lot of information there, but we've been talking about the SOP so much. I feel like we know what's in there. We've had loads of meetings on it and loads of back and forth with the technical working group and the communities to make the fine tuning details after the review process. So I don't want to spend a ton of time there, but I do want you to know that we are here to answer questions if you have them. Please send them. Don't feel like you have to limit yourself to sending questions at this meeting. Send them to Julie and I at any time. The next thing we want to dig into is the funding discussion. You'll remember that the last time we were all together, we brought information that talked about what had resulted from the financial analysis that our teaming partner WSP had put together for Reimagine. And what we found was that prior to 2020, and prior to pandemic, RTD was operating more service than allocated resources. And when we say, actually, Sebastian, do you want to go down? I think you need to go down maybe 2 slides. Yeah, one more. Perfect, right there. When we say allocated resources, we're talking about both funding that's available to RTD as well as the workforce capacity that RTD has. So you'll remember there was a lot of mandating where RTD was requiring overtime and RTD was operating more service than was financially viable in a long-term sustainable manner. That meant that they were deferring their state of good repair, which was causing other issues down the line. So we said, we have to understand this financial picture a little bit better. So we took this all the way out to 2050, looked at those long-term financial projections. And what we found was that there was limited or no capacity for RTD to grow the bus and rail services, to make substantial capital investments, and there was not the ability to construct or operate any of the unfinished portions of the Fast Tracks program in the next 20 years. So pretty limited when we dug into the details of the financial analysis, just very limited capacity for RTD to do anything that we want them to do, frankly. We're talking about finish Fast Tracks, and we're talking about electrify the fleet and grow the service and provide a better backbone. And we're asking and want our system to do more, but financially there is not the capacity to do that. So what we found is there's a pretty significant gap between what we as the public and elected officials and stakeholders want from this system and what RTD can actually financially and from a workforce perspective deliver. So one of the things that the advisory committee, as well as the technical working group, had asked us was for more information. When you say there's not enough capacity, what are we talking about as far as this deficit in the capacity? So on this next table, we have put together 3 scenarios. And the scenarios are, we started to talk about these the last time, but we didn't have any detail to them. So we've tried to put a little more detail to these. So in column 1, RTD fiscally constrained, that's what we've called scenario 1. And that really is only the very bare minimum. It's basically not growing any RTD services. It's maintaining the same level of service as the system optimization plan through 2050. So it might look a little different in how you deliver it, but the amount of service remains the same. It does invest in the 11 BRT corridors that we have talked about. And it does require some renovation to the bus facilities and some other, state of good repair that's ongoing, but there's no other major investments that are occurring in the system. The second scenario is what is currently in Dr. Cog's 2050 fiscally constrained plan. So this grows service to accommodate more demand on the system, and that comes from the region growing and from demand for transit growing because there's more congestion on the road and there's more desire to be on transit and out of your vehicle. So there's growth in the bus and rail system and how much is operated. We still have those 11 corridors that are included in Dr. Cog's fiscally constrained plan. We have some supporting facilities that go along with that. And it also includes the Northwest Rail peak period service. So that's all included today in Dr. Cog's fiscally constrained plan. Then the third scenario, we went bolder. People have asked us, but what do we need to do to support some of those greenhouse gas emissions reductions? What do we need to do to be more proactive in reducing congestion in our community, get people out of their cars and into transit? We need a better system, a bigger system, a bolder system. So we went all in and looked at what we could do if we doubled down and put, sometimes we refer to it as the kitchen sink option. We put everything we could into this. And so what we were able to do is it's about a doubling of service provided in the bus and rail system. We've doubled the number of BRT corridors in the system. There's a renovation of the bus and facilities and the supporting facilities that go with that. And we've assumed that the full Fast Tracks program, as was originally identified in the 2004 ballot initiative, is included and paid for in this aspirational scenario. And then there's a variety of other options or improvements in here that improve capacity of the system, safety of the system, ADA accessibility of the system, new technologies, zero emission fleet technologies, all sorts of other things that go in with that. So with those, basically holding the line is one, sort of a middle ground with that Dr. Cog fiscally constrained plan, and then a big and bold, we want a lot of stuff and have a great system. What is the bottom line? And so you'll see the bottom two rows in the table start to illustrate what happens, what's the bottom line there. So cumulative from now through 2050 under that RTD fiscally constrained plan, we still end up with about a $2 billion deficit. This assumes that TABOR is still in place. So those TABOR restrictions that restrict how much additional funding RTD can bring in is still in place. The second scenario, we end up with about a $20 billion deficit, which could be covered. We've assumed that TABOR has been removed at that point because you're going pretty bold. So we're assuming that we've gone to the voters and said, we've got to get rid of this restriction. And in addition, to cover that deficit, we need about a 0.5 cent sales tax added as well. Then when we go all the way out to that aspirational scenario, we're at about a $35 billion deficit, which requires a cent sales tax. This is a doubling of what RTD's tax is today. So I want to pause there. I think it's a lot of information. And I just want to make sure that everybody, if you have questions on that, because we're going to move into a GHG discussion, and then we're going to come back to this financial discussion and talk about what the next steps are. It's not, I want to say that this is not wildly unusual that a transit agency would see their long-term picture, be challenging as costs escalate and revenues do not keep pace with that, or any agency that's in that boat. But it is one that we need to grapple with, and we need to talk about some big things like, where are we actually headed with fast tracks? How do we get support from the region? If RTD needs an additional funding to get the job done, how do we do that? So there's some things to grapple with, and we'd like to talk about those. So I want to make sure we have a good baseline here, and then we can jump into GHG, and we'll come back around to this.
Holly, we do have a question in chat. John Taylor would like to know, what would the funding scenario look like if we simply removed the TABOR restriction?
Yeah, so Alyssa, if you're out there, I believe that if the TABOR restriction is removed in that RTD fiscally constrained scenario, so that's the only one where TABOR is still in place, I believe you're closer to being not having the $2 billion deficit. It basically covers that. But Alyssa, if you're out there, can you? Okay.
Yes, you can afford that scenario when you debruce.
Okay. Does that help, John? Does that the answer?
Yeah, so just to be clear, so right now it says 2 billion with TABOR in place, and that's a deficit, I guess is what you're saying.
Yes.
And so I just think it'd be helpful to know then what would you be able to afford if you didn't have that deficit? Just
Yes, so Alyssa, if you remove the Tabor restrictions, you're at about a break even, but you don't have additional money for large investments. Do I have that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we're just about able to cover that $2 billion deficit and be at the break even point with Tabor restrictions removed.
okay, so you assume the same boardings and operating capacity, that kind of thing. Is that where?
Yep.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Cool, thanks.
Mhm.
Other questions, thoughts on this? Happy to go into more detail. We can certainly come back to this as well, but to Holly's point, we really just want to make sure we all kind of have a baseline because we're going to kind of get into where do we go next with this?
Yeah. And, maybe what we can do is Michelle is going to step us through some of the analysis we've done on the greenhouse gas emissions, which has come up a bunch, in the last several months. So I think it's important that we have a good understanding of the analysis that's been done there. And then we can come back. So if you have more questions on this as we dig into the next steps, we can circle back on this slide if that would be helpful. Okay, let's jump into the greenhouse gas discussion. And I think Michelle is out there.
I'm here. I'm just not on
Okay.
video. This went a
Okay,
lot
great.
faster this morning, so if you hear a baby in the background, someone, and I just mute myself, someone please take over. Holly, thank you.
Yes, we will.
Okay.
Michelle is on mom duty.
Yes. Okay, so for the GHG discussion, we did some modeling for it to try to estimate how much of a GHG reduction we might expect in the future with various transit scenarios. And I'll say that the punchline is that even in our most ambitious schedule, where we assumed like the kitchen sink type transit system and doubled all the frequencies on all the lines, we see only a 0.5% reduction in GHG compared to the baseline scenario. So I understand how that could be a bit of an underwhelming number. And so I wanted to step through some numbers at a high level so that you can understand and get some back of the envelope type calculations, understand how this is possible when you might expect a little bit more of a shift. So on an average weekday in Denver, this is to give you a sense of the magnitude of travel in Denver. We have 15 million person trips. Those are trips on any mode. And, 13 million trips in motor vehicles, 2 million by walking and biking. And then those 13 million people traveling in vehicles equate to about 9 million trips made by vehicles. And we have, 250,000 hours of congestion on the roadways. So next slide. So here's also a few more numbers when we look at how this compares to transit. We have about 85 million vehicle miles of travel in 2019, and then projected to be 125 million in 2050. And we have 380,000 boardings in 2019 and projected 585,000, which 500,000 is a lot of boardings, but compared to the 13 million in vehicles, it's a relatively small number. And those boardings represent an even smaller number of trips because of transferring. You have about 1.4 boardings per trip. So the number of transit trips goes down a bit. We want to compare more directly to vehicle trips. So next slide. If we assume that the average trip by transit is about 8 miles, you can see that the number of miles that people are traveling on transit is about 3% of what they're traveling by vehicle. So that's a small percentage. Next slide. And then if we start to think about mode shifts, getting people out of their cars and into transit. It's not a one-to-one substitution where, you know, every additional mile that people travel on transit is not a mile you're taking away from vehicles on the road, because we have things like carpooling and mode shifts from walking and biking. So we assumed about 1.8 transit miles for each vehicle mile, and now we're down to 1.5% of vehicle miles traveled is what the transit miles traveled represents. So next slide. And now even in our most ambitious scenario, where we see, you know, boardings are pretty much doubled compared to 2019, using all that math, we have about 1.9% of the share of vehicle miles per travel. So we're only shifting that share of VMT to about 0.5%. So reducing VMT by 0.5%, which is about what we got when we did all the fancy modeling. So next slide. So all else being the same, kind of a rule of thumb is GHG and VMT are about a 1-to-1 ratio. So that means, like, even with these big, very, very ambitious ideas of what transit service could look like, we're still may only see at a maximum of a 0.5% reduction in GHG, which is telling us that just changes in transit service into the transit network is not going to solve all the GHG problems. So next slide. But there are scenarios that Dr.Cog has developed where we show significant changes in GHG, in which that transit service is an important part of the puzzle. Because there are things that they're assuming, including changes in land use, and then disincentivizing auto. And when you try to get people out of their vehicles and off the road, you need some mobility alternatives for them to be able to get to where they want to go, and transit is an important part of that. Also, conversion of the personal vehicles to EVs is a major reduction to GHG for each vehicle mile traveled. So that's those are the ways that we can really move the needle on GHG. So we just need to understand that even though we're talking about transit as a small piece of the GHG issues, that it's a very important part. They serve an important community. They provide options for those that don't have a vehicle. And we just need to recognize and remember that equity is a super, super important part of this transit system. And it also improves the resiliency of the system as a whole by increasing the number of mobility options. So I don't want that to get lost when we're talking about, you know, small shifts in GHG.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Michelle. So I think one of the things that came out, you know, you can hear from our tone, I think the team was hopeful that it would be a big wowing number, you know, we're going to solve the world's problems here. And then when we got into the analysis, it didn't. But there are a couple things that I think, and Michelle started to hit on these. It's a little, it's not quite the full picture because we are only looking at transit. Dr. Cog is able to do a much more comprehensive look. When they look at transit with the other things that Michelle mentioned, like land use, you can really pack a punch. The other thing is that 0.5% is actually 0.5% reduction of a 10% reduction that Dr. Cog is looking for. So it's not as though we're looking to reduce 100%. So 0.5 of 10% is actually a pretty substantial packs a punch. So I think there's some things to be aware of, you know, sort of in the nuances. And while we had hoped it would be higher than that, I think it's just a really important piece of the puzzle.
It looks like we have a question from Jackie Millay.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks. It would be helpful if you could put together kind of a pie chart that shows the whole is 10%. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. Of that 10%, only 0.5 would be GHG. Like, do we know how much percentage would be represented by land use changes and how much is represented by a switch over of fleet to more EV cars on the road? So in that 10, if the pie chart is 10%, just a 0.5 is from transit. Is that a fair statement? Do you know what the other percentages are?
You know, Dr. Cog has done a bunch of analysis on that. And what we've agreed to is put kind of a one pager together. That's a snapshot of a bunch of pertinent information. I think that's a great way to look at it. So we'll see if we can pull all that together. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can add a little context that those things are sometimes hard to separate. So we were just looking at transit alone, but when you add transit and land use, there's interactions that happen. And so it's hard to separate, you know, changes in mode shift in GHG, whether that's the land use or the transit service or both. So it's kind of a hard thing to quantify in a pie chart.
Yeah, but I think we can come up with something that gives like the order of magnitude so people can, knowing that it's not going to be exactly mile for mile, right?
Sure.
Yeah, and I think just getting an order of magnitude for people as we contemplate this, and I very much appreciate the other, particularly the equity issue that's addressed by transit that isn't addressed anywhere else. But as we look to the GHG solution, I think understanding the components is very helpful beyond the scope of this committee. So thank you.
Yep.
Other questions? Other thoughts? Were you surprised at this number? To Holly's point, we were hoping it'd be higher. Kathy?
Yes, I was surprised at this number to answer your question, but I just wanted to comment also on the equity piece because with housing prices and the cost of living, I mean, I think it's just imperative that if people want to live and work in the Denver metro area, you know, without having to move out to the most far-flung edges of the region of the area, they're going to have it's imperative that we have transit for them, because affording housing and an automobile and being car dependent on getting to your place of employment is really going to squeeze a lot of families. I think we all can see that coming. It's already happening. So the equity piece, I was glad to see equity in all caps. I'll say that because I really feel that's got to be, I understand that the GHG, we were hoping that would be a bigger number so we could really tout that and get people on board with really supporting the financial situation by saying, oh, we've got to do this for the environment. And we do. And it is a significant number when you say when you make 0.5% part of 10% as opposed to 100%. But the equity piece is really critical to me to get people to be able to live and work and access what the metro region has to offer, and without having to have a car or multiple cars to function as a family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, thank you for your perspective on that. Other thoughts, questions on the GHG?
Hi, it's Jackie again. I just didn't feel like raising my hand, but I do feel like I think this is going to be a shock to a lot of people. I know the mayors have been talking a lot about the importance of transit as we look to resolve some of the GHG issues. So I do think we need to be very thoughtful about how this information is communicated, and the more information that you could provide about the interplay between transit and land use is going to be important. And I think also acknowledgement that some communities don't have the option to change their land use and don't also have the transit option. So I think very carefully constructing how we communicate this information is going to be imperative. So
That's an excellent point. Absolutely. Let's see, we have a question from Claire Levy.
Good morning. Thank you for the presentation. And I see Kevin Flynn's hand is up as well, who's the DRCOG board chair. I just wanted to just observe that, it is that combination of land use and transportation that is going to get us to where we need to go. And that's always been the most thorny thing to effectuate, because land use decisions are so decentralized and localized, and we know from just the policy perspective what needs to be done, but effectuating that, implementing that is up to the decisions of city councils, county commissions, town councils, et cetera, all throughout the metro area. And Dr.Cog is in the very early stages of discussing what tools we may have to implement these things, using transportation funding as an incentive. But it is the really, really tough conundrum that we've had for a long time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Kevin Flynn, good morning. Oh, gotta find the mute button. There it is.
You think I'd remember to unmute? Sorry. And I don't want to start a lengthy discussion on land use, because I know, frankly, I think there's a lot of disagreement on whether the land use policies, which ones are effective and which ones are detrimental. So I want to ask a very specific question about the scenarios, and I think it was the aspirational one on the A line, and it talked about double tracking. What is the assumption for double tracking the A line? Is that the 72nd and Himalaya station out by Gaylord would be added? Because otherwise, I'm wondering, are we looking at increasing headways? Because the 15-minute headway on the A line is was thought to be sufficient. We could add cars rather than headways. So what is the reason for double tracking A line?
So you're into details on the rail line that I don't have right at the moment, but what we know is that when we're talking about reliability and capacity for the system, that generally double tracking is considered, the optimal. So we have made some assumptions around that. And again, I wouldn't put in that any of these is the exact project that's being put in. What we're trying to convey here is you've got a big, bold, invested system that has frequent service. You can get anywhere throughout the region that you want to go quickly and efficiently and reliably, is what we're trying to do here. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the specifics around those capital investments.
Okay, I'm just curious because as I recall, double tracking was going to be required if we added that one additional station up by 72nd and Dunkirk or Himalaya. But otherwise, I was wondering if the assumption was that we would increase headways on there. Thank you.
Yes, that what we are assuming is that decreasing headways, increasing frequencies along the system, and that is kind of throughout the entire system is what we're assuming, because we've up at the top here, and I didn't go over these numbers, but so in 2020, now these are pandemic numbers, on a daily basis, somewhere around 200,000 boardings a day. Prior to pandemic, you're in the 300s here. We're talking about going up all the way into the 800,000 boardings a day. So you have a big jump in the number of people and the demand for the system that we're talking about. So you're trying to increase frequencies and capacities throughout the whole network. And there's obviously areas that see it more than others, but that our goal was to say, okay, you've got this big invested network everywhere.
Thank you. Otherwise, we can leave the land use and density debate for another time. Thank you.
Yeah.
A question from George Teal. George.
Hey, thanks, guys. I kind of something that Commissioner Levy said really kind of caught my attention, and in that Clara very rightly pointed out that land use is a distributed solution because it's an individual decision by each municipality, by each county within the region. And it strikes me if this is a priority for us to pursue, then we really need to have an integrated plan that actually takes advantage of the need to diversify and distribute services throughout the system, as opposed to some of the other planning that we've had going on here, where we talk about focusing on the central core of the region and focusing on specific groups commonly related to equity within the region. it would strike me that if this is a goal that we're going to pursue in order to get that 0.5%, and yet the larger piece of the analysis is land use decisions to lower the greenhouse gas emissions, we're probably going to need to have our planning include an idea of distributed services and expanded services into the places that people are moving to in the region, perhaps outside of the core. Otherwise, I don't understand how we would make everything fit together. You know, we're going to need to make priority decisions that will affect. And then we're doing it at a time of constrained economic difficulties for people in the region. That's not just affecting some of our lower income areas, but really everyone through the middle class. I'm sure there are billionaires that are just having a fine time right now, but you know, we need to kind of consider who do we need participating in lowering greenhouse gases and expanding transit ridership. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, George. Dr. Cog.
Well, good morning, everybody. You hear me okay, Julie?
Yeah, you sound great.
Thank you. First of all, George, that's a great pick you got there, my friend. Love the hat.
Don't forget to go to the fair there, Doug. I'll get you tickets if you need it, brother.
I'll be there, sir. No, listen, I don't want to belabor the point either on the land use, but of course there's obviously there's you know, the connection cannot be argued between transportation, of course. I think it's important to one, consider that, you know, what we're showing, at least in our modeling, is that, you know, the diversification of our transportation portfolio has really helped, right? Being able to provide options to the folks within our region really creates some synergies. And of course, land use, you know, I think the importance of land use, in particular in housing, residential development, is that there needs to be a more diversification of housing, right? I mean, there's areas and opportunities within every part of our region for, you know, more densely populated urban center type developments. And it only has to be a fraction of total percent of square acres within our square miles within our region, but it does make a significant difference, and our modeling tends to show that. I do have an offer that if you know, we've done, as has been suggested, a lot of analysis related to the greenhouse gas emission rule and some of our modeling. I'd be happy at some point in the near future to get staff on and provide some of that analysis for the group. Thank you.
That would be terrific. Thank you very much. I think it's a well summarized sort of part of this discussion through Brian Welch's comment in the chat, you know, that really what we need is transit, land use, cleaner fuels, conversion of private vehicle fleet to zero emissions, more walking, more biking, and all that's got to work together for us to really truly address the GHG issues. So I thought that was a nice summary. Thank you, Brian.
No problem.
Yep, that's all. That's it, guys.
That's all you got.
Problem solved. Any other thoughts and questions on the financial scenarios? This has been a great discussion. Holly, I think we can keep moving forward.
Okay, Julie, do you want to take, I think our next section here, we are moving into sort of strategies and next steps. And you'll recall that the last time we were all together, we brought to you a set of vision statements, which are on the left side of the summary, a set of objectives, strategies, and then metrics to evaluate whether we were, you know, over time getting the job done or not. Those are still being reviewed, and I've put some of them up here as a summary just to refresh you on those. So Julie's going to step us through what we've learned through this process, and then try to have some more dialogue around next steps and how we get some buy-in on how we move forward and what's included in the mobility plan for the future.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Go back to one slide real quick, Sebastian. Just wanted to, this is the information that we presented last time for you. Thank you guys so much for those of you who participated in the survey. We are still taking comments on this information. Feel free to reach out to us, but we're not taking, since we reviewed it last time, we're not going to go into the details. What we are going to talk about, if you go to the next slide, we had a fantastic opportunity to go meet with the RTD Board of Directors in June on the 15th. And given that this is our policy board, this is our, this is the direction of the organization. So we wanted to take it up a level and obviously not go through all the details and all the metrics and all the tactics. Really wanted to kind of take it up a level and say, all right, from a policy board perspective, from the leaders of this organization, what are the things that we're seeing that we've identified as sort of key policy concerns at a very high level through the last couple of years of discussion and public outreach and technical analysis that we've done. And so these are the three policy concerns. I'll go through these and then we'll talk a little bit about the feedback we did get from the board on the 15th. So in general, and again, these are kind of at the highest level. One of the things that we've identified is that, the board there's varying degrees and perspectives on the goals for how and where to provide service. There's not, if you look from the outside, and there's not clarity in the region in terms of why this route over that route, why frequency here and not frequency there. There's some general guidelines, but there's not a lot of clarity around that. So that's one of our policy concerns. The second is the information that we just reviewed with you that, frankly, Holly and I laugh when we started this project. That is not the financial analysis we thought we would be presenting. But the reality is, the more we've gotten into the details, the reality is there is a long-term substantial funding gap for the organization. So that is a challenge. And then finally, really, what does that mean? What it means is there's a significant gap between public and stakeholder expectations of where service and how much service and what RTD can accomplish versus the resources, and that's financial as well as workforce that RTD has in place. And so that has raised some challenges. So this is what we heard. So we present these policy concerns to the RTD board. Just to be very clear, these are not board actions. This is not board consensus. This is general feedback we received in our informal discussion with the board on the 15th. There definitely seemed to be a consensus around the board about pursuing additional funding. There seemed to be a lot of very positive energy that on the board of directors, we're not accomplishing everything we want to accomplish as an organization, and we know it's going to take additional funding, additional resources for that. We also, there was a lot of talk, and it ties very nicely to some of the conversation we've had here already today about this is not just RTD in a silo. This is us working on a regional context to kind of to determine what is the best way to move forward. And there was even some talk about holding some sort of summit, some sort of regional summit, getting a lot of you involved in some discussions about the next steps. The biggest sort of question that's still out there kind of gets to that, where and how do we provide service? There was a lot of support on the board for prioritizing service to equity populations and that regional backbone that we've talked about. However, we're always concerned because we also recognize, and there's a lot of concern that we recognize that everybody is paying into this system. And so that's that balance between really, looking at providing service in these dense areas to these equity communities that really are riding the service more than anyone else and needing the service, versus how do you deal with the less dense areas, but the people that are also paying into the system. A lot of talk about GHG, talking a little bit about that. A lot of support for this concept that we've had about partnership programs under the different scenarios, the opportunity for RTD to, maybe provide match funding for local partnerships to get to that community level, very hyper-local service. And then finally, just sort of a need for the RTD board of directors to have a communication plan that sort of manages this expectation. So how are we moving forward and how do we communicate that as a region? So next slide, please. So I think we've kind of gone into this in quite a bit of detail, but the reality is, here's the fundamental issue, is that, long-term financial projections, they're not looking strong. They're not looking like we have a lot of additional funding without providing additional funding sources to grow rail or bus services, make substantial capital investments, or, finish fast tracks. But the challenge is, and you all know this, it is a heavy lift. It is a challenge to think about, okay, if we all agree that RTD is not doing everything we want RTD to be doing, how do we move forward with this? Do we agree, and this is the question for this group, do you agree that RTD should be seeking additional funding? And if that is the case, how do we work through some of the challenges, the political challenge and the perception issues and the issues with unresolved fast track corridors? How do we move forward? Because we recognize that's such a heavy lift to try to go forward for debrucing, to try to go forward for potentially an additional sales tax or other funding sources. How do we get regional buy-in? So if you go to the next slide, this is our question. How do we get regional buy-in to move forward if we agree? So that the two questions, do you agree that RTD should be seeking additional funding? And if so, how do we structure that in a way that we can get regional buy-in and support? So I recognize this is not a softball question. I am not throwing out, it's early in the morning to be throwing out something this challenging and hard, but that is kind of where we as a project team feel like there's the crux of the issue is if we all agree we want more, how do we move forward to make sure that RTD has the resources to do that? So we got some great feedback from the technical working group we can share with you as well, but really just wanted to open up the discussion and say, what do you guys think? How do we move forward? George.
Thanks, Julie. I mean, I think it kind of goes back to, I allude back to my earlier comments in that, you know, we've got some real challenges here in terms of we have northern areas of the RTD district whom, you know, it's almost a matter of policy that they do not feel like they have received a return in their investment of the fast track sales tax that they've been paying for years. I have a municipality here in the county that wants, you know, had an effort in the legislature to withdraw from RTD. And then my largest municipality here in Douglas County withdrew from RTD in 2005. So they won't necessarily be a part of that voting solution, but you've got these municipalities that we're going to ask to make land use decisions in order to support this path forward, while at the same time we're then asking them to, you know, take an increase of a percentage point on sales tax. So I don't know that it's impossible, and I don't know that that's worth turning away from. Oh, and then I can't help but notice the inherent contradiction that we see in terms of some of the analysis we've done. You know, I don't see how a system that is going to a system that is focused on encouraging land use to support transit in some of the more far-flung areas of the region, how that helps with some of the analysis we've done on the labor side for the RTD employees. I don't know how that, I see an inherent contradiction in the work we've done to analyze our at-risk populations, our equity populations within the district. And so at the same time, we're going to need those voters in some of the more distributed municipalities and unincorporated county areas in order to create a political solution here. And so we're really going to need to decide where our priorities are, and if these are priorities we wish to pursue. I think it starts to define the larger integrated plan for RTD. All the while, everybody's out there paying $5 a gallon for gas, and I'm not hearing that is an incentivization to then begin transit ridership. It is merely being perceived as a financial burden that they're having to pay. And then we're going to go and promise them transit solutions by first asking them to pay more. So don't get me wrong. I know that sounds all Debbie Downer and everything, but it's per your question, Julie, that's how I perceive those answers.
So do you see any opportunities, George, for a way to structure this in a way that could get more support in some of the areas, in some of your areas?
Well, what I think it means is with all the scenarios that with the optimization plan specifically that we've talked about doing, I do think it needs a change of direction to where it is going to focus on, how to get transit solutions where the target populations are. And we know that we have good dense populations the closer you move to the center, but the demographic shifts are counterindicating to that. We're not seeing more families in the Denver public school system. They're looking to close schools because the demographics are shifting away from school age children in that school district. But then we're seeing demographic shifts to where it's shifting to the periphery, which I think is a reflection of what we have seen in America ever since World War II, of young people like living in urban areas, then they have their 2.5 kids and they want to get a dog and live in the suburbs. And so they move to the periphery. Is there a demographic shift of baby boomers who are in retirement age moving into the core to buy those houses, which we know the housing costs have gone up. And so these are individuals that have that capital savings and can make that move. But then doesn't that indicate a need for public safety that is, again, counter-indicating to, and actually this is something Kevin Flynn and I have talked a bit about, counter-indicative to some of the political moves we've seen vis-a-vis urban population and the relationship to public safety agencies. So my only problem is that I see inherent contradictions that spill away from basic engineering and traffic planning and transportation planning into associated political problems that would need changes to those associated political conditions. So I see challenges. I don't see easy answers, Julie.
Great. Thank you very much for your feedback. Really appreciate that. Danny?
Yeah, thanks. Couple of ideas I have that I'll throw into the mix on how RTD can obtain regional support to move forward. One is, I think so much of our, usually when you get wins, it's because it's built on smaller wins. And so I really do think the partnerships with local communities could build a lot of momentum there, more that we have good examples of local cities and counties doing things that could then be scaled up. I think that helps everybody, exposes people, gets people wanting to work in that direction. So I think just being way more nimble and open to lots of just little, when I say little, it could still be pretty big projects, but lots of local projects, and recognizing RTD might not drive all of them, and sometimes leading by following. So letting, kind of local ideas bubble up. Second idea is just doing a little bit of what we've seen today, which is just clarifying our choices. You all, RTD knows better than anyone else what things cost, what you can get for what money. And so the more that you're helping people who say, oh, RTD's service, doesn't come often enough, the more you can go, oh, well, here's a simple tool for you. If you want your buses to come every 15 minutes, then here's how much more it would cost. And just clarifying those things, but clarifying them in ways that the public understands. So I think buses coming every 15 minutes or every 10 minutes is a good, example of ways to talk about it so that people can imagine what they get for their money. And then the third thing, which is a little chicken and the egg, is the driver operator shortages and challenges that we've had. I fully expect that some of that will need some additional funding because you have limited dollars to be able to invest in the people that work there. I think this last contract is a great step forward, but I do think there are other things that RTD can do, and the more that RTD has, the more that there are stories or coming out about the great working conditions and how it's a job everybody wants, that will significantly help and build confidence in the region. And like I said, I don't think you can totally do that without some new funding, but there are definitely things I think you have at your disposal, and ways that working with the drivers and operators could create a better situation there. I think those three things would certainly help build some regional support to do something on a bigger scale.
Terrific. Thank you, Danny. Audrey DeBarros, you're next.
Good morning, everybody. As the Transportation Management Organization representing the Northwest Metro region, this topic is a rather sensitive one, I will say. I think from my perspective, the question is, balancing mobility needs with policy needs. And that recognizing that the fast tracks ballot issue approved back in 2004 has really not come to fruition in our region to the extent that it has in most of the other parts of the metro area other than the north. That I feel like we really need to figure out how to make the Northwest region whole. That this will continue to be an issue for the Denver metro area until our region is satisfied. And so I think an opportunity to move that conversation is going to begin as part of the Peak Service Northwest Rail study, which RTD has invested up to $4 million to advance. So we have ridership and cost understandings. And as a part of that conversation, start political conversations regarding how the region will support the Northwest Metro region. It's otherwise, you will not satisfy, you will not build the trust of the public to get anything approved. And I think transparency for whatever comes forward through this planning process of Peak Service Northwest, well as other conversations to come, really needs to focus on building transparency and trust with the public. Thank you.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, I'll just offer a couple comments. First of all, second Audrey's comments just about the politics of and the need for the analysis that we're doing on the Northwest rail line, and not knowing what necessarily that will demonstrate, but knowing that just having that information will help us make some more strategic decisions about investments. But I do want to respond to George's comment, and just representing business interests in the Northwest area. I will say that for us, he fundamentally raises the question that is, I think, critical to where we're trying to head with this organization, and that is to make investments that are going to have the greatest utility for our community. And we can't do that by serving every interest. I mean, if there's going to continue to be sprawl out to and more suburban type development, we're never going to be able to serve that efficiently with transit. That's the reality. So for me, and it relates to, I think, what are positive steps and new approaches that RTD is taking, and that is that if we can do basic things well, like providing regional transit service that is high performing, that is reliable, that will draw in and of itself folks to that service, and I think build political support for transit. If communities are interested in experimenting with more localized service, I think that these partnerships, which I assume would encompass some sort of local community investment in them, would allow us and encourage communities to develop themselves in a way that facilitates greater transit use. So, you know, I hear what George is saying, and I understand that, you know, there is that, there are various trends back and forth between more urbanized development and then more suburbanized. To me, I don't see how RTD effectively serves transit to that more suburban area, and we just have to acknowledge that. So that would be, you know, the perspective that I think that we're advancing here with this proposal, and I think it's the right direction.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Levy.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm going to start by just echoing Audrey's comments and also expressing my agreement with what John Taylor just said. RTD, you know, this is similar to the discussions at Dr. Cog as well, that we have limited financial support, limited transportation dollars. RTD, you know, as we've been discussing ad nauseum here for years, doesn't have the resources to be all things to all people. And the communities within the boundaries of the regional transportation district have to do their part to create communities that support transit. And it can't be the other way around, that they're going to build and develop however they want, and then they're going to say, okay, RTD, serve us. It has to be a partnership. But the reason I raised my hand is to go back to a question I asked in the chat about the sub-regional service councils, which Bill Soroy responded to. And I think to this specific question here of obtaining regional support, I think implementing those sub-regional councils is going to be really key, because as a lot of people have already been saying, people need to know that there is responsiveness on the part of RTD to their needs. And so much of this, it really depends on people in these counties. You know, Boulder County is supposed to be its own sub-regional forum. You know, being able to say, okay, we understand the transit needs of our residents, the communities within Boulder County. We can be so much more responsive. RTD has its role to play, and we can help fill in that gap and integrate the system in a much more efficient and responsive way. And I really think that responsiveness is the key to this. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for that feedback. Mayor Millet. You might be muted.
Apologies, thank you. I agree with a lot of the sentiments expressed by the prior speakers and commenters, but I do want to make a couple other statements. This vote was passed in 2004, and many of these suburban communities were already built out to a large extent, not mine. And I think Lone Tree is very lucky. We've been able to take advantage of current thinking and put density along our light rail line. But some of the neighboring communities in Douglas County were already built that way. And when they passed the vote and when they agreed to that tax, there was an expectation of service, right or wrong. So to go back now and say, well, you developed wrong, so you're not going to get service, to me doesn't seem quite fair. My neighbors in Parker, you know, we've had ongoing issues. They expected some level of bus service, and to say, well, these other communities have built differently and we're going to serve them instead, just doesn't sound right. So I do feel like the partnerships and working with local communities who have been paying these taxes and not seeing service improve, if anything, seeing service decrease, is a challenge that must be addressed through trust and transparency. And also, you know, the Southwest line is not finished either, and they've been paying that tax as well now. So I recognize there's a lot of communities, not just the northern portion of the region, that have not received the level of service that they voted for in 2004. So I just don't want to lose sight of that. I think the focus needs to be broader. In addition to that, I really agree with a lot of the things Danny said about kind of rebuilding, clarifying choices and transparency and rebuilding trust. And I think RTD has a little bit of a credibility issue to address with the public before they go out and ask for additional dollars. And that credibility, in my mind, can be addressed through improved safety on the line, improved ability to attract employees and presenting, this is a good place to work, and through the partnerships that they can have with local jurisdictions to provide a different level of service to those communities that aren't designed with the density of employment and housing along transit lines.
Thank you for that feedback. Well, let me throw this out. We got an interesting concept from the technical working group, just, as we were brainstorming. We'll throw that out and then we can kind of get a reaction. So part of what they recommended was perhaps you look at some sort of statewide ballot initiative, but you carve out the funding in a way that RTD gets funding for a regional backbone, like we've been talking about, the R and RTD, the regional backbone service, and the rest of the funds are carved out and divided up among the local jurisdictions, who would then have control over those funds to make local transit decisions. So again, just an idea from the technical working group. Interested if, kind of what you guys think of that. We have, I'm not sure, I'm sorry, M. Harvey's.
Yes, I just wanted to add to it. I represent ATU, which is the working group at RTD represented. And I agree with the last statement, is safety needs to be a number one concern. I think that along with the passengers dealing with safety issues, it's a big problem for retention at RTD. And until RTD solves the safety issue for its employees, I don't think the recruitment and retention for employees is going to improve. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. Absolutely. So any thoughts on sort of the TWG's concept? Danny?
I guess I would just amend it to say, put aside the should it be a statewide ballot or regional ballot, put that aside. But it sounds like the concept that was proposed is RTD should just focus on regional and local government should get the money for the local service. Is that the basic concept?
So that hyper local community level service. Yeah.
It'd be interesting. I'd love to see some, it would certainly allow local governments to experiment. I think what we've seen is, if you get one bite at the apple, Fast Tracks was 2004, and here we are 20 years later, with maybe another chance to do something in the next few years. So I guess it'd be good to make sure that there is a way, if you do that kind of model where RTD gets regional funds and then local governments get local funds, that there's a way for the local governments there's a way to learn from the local government usage of the dollars so that you don't have to wait 20 years for the next, expansion of the thing. So I don't know exactly how you make that nimble, and maybe local governments will just naturally work together when they have got something going well. But I think we should be open to the idea that RTD wouldn't be the end all be all for all transit in the region. We should be open to that idea for sure, and see if there are better ways to get it forward. At the end of the day, to me, it's all about just, do we get more people riding? And if that's the way, then that will achieve most of our regional goals.
Terrific. Thank you, Danny. George?
Thanks, Julie. I think there are headwinds for a statewide ballot initiative. However, for the second half of having that sub-regional approach of how to shape and how to craft the services, I'm actually all in favor of it. And I turn back to comment just made by Claire in terms of, there is that option where Boulder is its own sub-region, and how that allows them that opportunity to make those decisions of what service is required, what service is needed to fill the needs of the residents of Boulder County. I know there is the one plan where Douglas County is its own sub-regional. I'm 2 thumbs up with that. but I also know the other two plans have us in that alignment where the Douglas County communities are aligned in with Arapahoe County and specifically Aurora. And I still say that's a superior way to go in order to craft the service solution there and then craft the financial support for that solution. So that would be something I would definitely be in favor of. And I think a lot of folks in this area could get behind.
Terrific, thank you. Kathy.
Thank you. Good morning. Echoing a lot of the great comments that have been already stated, I also just want to speak in strong support of the sub-regional councils because as has been stated, the input from local governments to RTD about what is most critical to get buy-in, and also if we're going to ask local governments to put up funding, they need to feel that they have some control and some direction as to where that's going so that they feel that it's a good investment and they can really get behind that. Another comment that was made earlier is that, yes, shoring up what RTD already has in place and improving services. For example, I represent South Thornton. The N line has not had consistent route service. And I mean, that's just one small example. I know that we're not the only area impacted by that, but to get people to buy in, there's got to be good delivery on what's existing, and also to the statement about employment and wanting to tout RTD as a good employer and making sure that their employees are safe and respected, all just goes hand in hand with all these previous comments. I just want to give my support to that. But I really think the sub-regional councils are critical and should hopefully will be enacted as soon as possible. Thank you.
No, thank you. And this has been super helpful and a wonderful conversation, but it still kind of gets to the crux of the issue. A lot of the feedback, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm hearing is, well, we got to improve the services that people have today, especially in the less dense areas. But I'm not sure how RTD does that given their financial situation. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 unless, and I'm opening, to a discussion. Are we talking about moving service from more dense areas? I don't know how that works given the financial situation. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, that is the crux of the issue, that RTD can't improve services and provide additional services without resources. But if we can't get additional resources until we provide additional services, you see the kind of the challenge with that. So keep thinking about that. We'd love some ideas. Director Davidson.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody on the call for the feedback. It's always helpful to listen to this. And I see that my colleagues, Director Williams and Director Cook, both posted comments in the chat along the lines of this concept of partnership and regional connectivity. I just want to offer that certainly one of the challenges that we're facing is, as we look at the SOP and contracting service in less dense areas, while we're faced with the decision of having to do this for the financial constraints that we're talking about here, we're further impacting folks that are sort of trapped in these sprawled areas that are dependent upon service. So I can speak, for example, very specifically to an issue that's been coming up in Broomfield quite a bit, which is that at the border at 144th, going north is no longer covered. And has not been covered even by FlexRide, which is a problem for folks moving into higher density developments when we get to that land use discussion around 7 and 25. And the reality of where we're at, because of our history here, is we have, as we've been discussing, absolutely no credibility to come to the voters and ask to pass a tax to increase this. But the reason I bring up Broomfield in particular, aside from being familiar with it, is Broomfield's done some of its own polling. And I would encourage anyone curious to speak to Mayor Castriota about what the appetite would be for local funding for transportation. And if we look at that 144th border that I'm speaking about, I see Director Cook mentioned in Jeffco, the aging population. We do have a service that's offered in Broomfield that's called Easy Ride, which is for adults over the age of 60, as well as adults over the age of 18 with disabilities. Now, that's not a very heavily funded service. It's a relatively small service, but it's something that's provided locally and can actually be used to connect individuals to the regional backbone bringing them to regional routes like the N line, the 120, et cetera. So I just wanted to offer that if, for me as a board member, and I think some of my colleagues, although I won't speak for them, are very intrigued by this idea of what does a regional network look like that's really well optimized, and how do we address particularly equity populations that are kind of spread throughout our large sprawl, is going to require working with local partners, even just by way of the fact that we don't really have the credibility to ask for a statewide funding. So anyway, thanks for all the feedback along these lines.
Terrific, thank you.
Hello.
Daniel? Daniel, I don't know if you're reaching out to us or if you're. Oh. Other thoughts on this? You see our conundrum. You've thrown out a lot of great ideas, a lot of great things to think about. But it is a challenge, and we recognize we're in a tough spot here. Mayor Merlet.
I just want to echo again, I think making the existing system safe, clean, inviting, and reliable. So we all understand you can't expand it, but if you can improve the experience on the lines, on the routes today with the prioritizing that, I think would increase credibility. And, you know, for my community, we've already self-funded a on-demand micro transit service that moves people throughout our city for free. They used to be using it to access light rail. They're not anymore because they do not feel safe and comfortable riding the line. So I can't overstress the importance of making those improvements without adding anything, just improve the experience people are getting today to make them choose to go back to transit. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great point. George.
Hey, thanks, Julie. So, you know, Jackie, we just heard Jackie's comments, and the Honorable Mayor is certainly one of my best friends, and I think she really hit the Hale square. But in terms of RTD has some trust to earn back in the region. I don't think that's a surprise. That's not a bombshell to say that. And a little earlier, John Taylor, he made, I hope I'm saying that right, John, he made a very good point in that what is probably required is RTD to earn back that trust as an excellent, by delivering excellent service and being known, and that will draw ridership, that will draw people into using the service. But then my only concern and comment with both Jackie and John is there's a time lag there. And so, you know, that doesn't mean that we can, you know, rush out, and whether it's a debrucing that's going on the ballot this fall or perhaps in 2 years, or whether it is, again, seeking additional funding through a statewide ballot question, there's a time lag. And then when we talk about meeting our greenhouse gas emission goals, well, that is also time-based. So again, I don't mean to say there's anything impossible here, but I feel like any solution must take into account how we meet some of these affiliated goals, understanding that it's going to take time for RTD to earn back the trust of the former and prospective riders that will be required in order to meet these associated environmental goals, as well as any economic development goals in terms of how municipalities in the region, how areas in the region make land use decisions that could support transit service, as well as, you know, just earning the political will one drop at a time with the people whom we would expect to vote yes for these additional funding resources.
Great points. Great points. Thank you. Other thoughts? I know this is just a total softball question I've thrown out there, easy peasy. Danny.
I guess I've heard a lot about I've heard that RTD is not well trusted at this moment for a long time. I'm just curious, has RTD ever done polling, or what's the latest polling to just suggest? It'd be good to kind of know how bad is it? Like if we're trying to build regional support among voters, like just what's kind of some top line, is RTD less popular than Congress? That would be a really bad sign, So like, where does RTD rank in the popularity contest of a basic poll? I'd love to just have some grounding on where we
That's a great point. We certainly, as this project, haven't done anything political polling, but Holly can help me with this. We did do a community survey, a statistically valid, pretty large scale community survey in 2020, I believe it was. And Holly, you can jump in on this, but I think that the thing that struck me that was very interesting is that we divided the results out by customers and people that didn't really ride the system. And the customers had a much, 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 much higher and more positive perspective on RTD than people who did not ride the system. So we thought that was just kind of an interesting observation that we've seen that customers really didn't have that same level of concern.
Yes.
Holly, would you say that's correct?
That is correct. Yeah. It was a very interesting sort of split there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then I would say this won't solve a lot of the problems, but we do have a big fare free program in the month of August, which gives us an opportunity to expose even more people to RTD. And as been mentioned before, there needs to be improvements on safety and service reliability and on workers' conditions, a whole host of things. But if it's the case that people who ride tend to have a better impression, that doesn't surprise me. You tend to have a better impression of things you've had experience with, even if the experience wasn't perfect. So I'll then add that to the how can we obtain regional support to move forward. Let's make sure we all lean into the August Fare Free month and make that as successful as possible, because that's a phenomenal opportunity to expose people to RTD and start building some momentum.
Absolutely. And the other thing, maybe Brian can help with this, is I know there was a strategic plan that was approved by the board of directors. And Brian, correct me, but I believe there's going to be a series of community polling associated with that to determine sort of perceptions around RTD. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The other thing in response to the question that was illuminating when we did the BBC survey, where we had, I think, 900 riders and 168 non-riders, that goes back to Director Williams' comment. 28% of the people that we surveyed, riders, said they are not coming back after the pandemic is over, whenever that is, which goes to this whole question of we need to plan for what will be rather than what was. But yes, and there has been some additional insights on our district's customers, and I think Bill Van Meter can illuminate that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Julie and Brian. Yeah, Bill Van Meter here. So to that point, as part of RTD's recently adopted, well, not that recently anymore, strategic plan that was established and adopted by the board last year, one of the key elements for tracking success and progress towards meeting the strategic plan metrics is a regular survey of RTD's customers and the public at large. Back, I believe it was in the March timeframe of this year, I'm looking at some of the top line results right now, we were able to release the first survey of our customers and community members at large. In terms of our fixed route bus customers, rail customers, paratransit customers, the pretty high levels of satisfaction with the agency service, 81% on bus, 85% for rail, 91% for paratransit. Interestingly, among community members, 86% of community members believe the agency brings value to the metro area, but only 34% said that they find RTD valuable to themselves. So those are just a few of the top line takeaways from that survey that kind of respond a little bit to Danny Katz's question. And I think we'll work to provide a link to some more detailed information from that survey to this group following this meeting today. So just wanted to let folks hear that perspective and that information.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And Bill actually did put the link to the initial survey results that were conducted into the chat if you're interested. Well, we have a few more minutes. What other thoughts, other questions on this just super easy, softball question? Other thoughts?
I guess I'll just add one more, which is oftentimes when I hear people say positive things about RTD, it's oftentimes about a special service like the Broncos ride or the Rockies ride or whatnot. And I know they're small enough that maybe they don't appear on the overall SOP or the overall thing, but it does feel like being more nimble or dynamic with providing service to things that, we know a ton of people are going to. We know it's exciting, like the Avs parade today. It's too late, obviously, but if there had been some like RTD Avs parade ride, I don't know, the Fare Free program kind of gets at it too, but like just good heart building community rides to things we all love and bring us together could be, simple ways to build support and demonstrate value and service.
Absolutely. Thank you. And if you're interested in more information about Fare Free August, Kate Williams, Director Williams, has put in her contact information in the chat as well, if you'd like. So we'd love your help getting the word out about that.
I'm sure Director Davidson and Director Cook would be happy to help as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. I'm going to go to Bill Sroy, and then we'll go back to you, George, here in just a second.
So I wanted to ask the group, I asked the technical working group the same question, because I think our board had some discussion of this when we met with them on the 15th is, as a next steps. I mean, we are going to be wrapping up Reimagine here shortly, but, this conversation has been great. It's been great perspective, I think, to understand. And I think I know I've heard our board members express appreciation for this feedback. I guess one question is, how do we continue this conversation? What do folks think about as a next step for this? One of the ideas that our board threw out, and I think board members here can comment on that, was the idea of some sort of a summit that would happen. I don't know if that's the right vehicle to do that. I don't know what it is, but there is a board conversations. There's an ad hoc committee about Tabor, but how do people think that this conversation needs to happen? Again, we've heard things about transparency, and we are certainly being as open as we can in terms of what we are facing in the future and where we're at. So I guess a question to throw out to this group is, what feedback would you have on terms of going beyond this conversation and trying to define what more concrete next steps?
George, you're next.
I would like to try to answer Bill's question that he posed to us, but first I kind of want to go back and talk about the free fare month in August. Tell you what, guys, I'll go ahead. We'll engage our Ministry of Propaganda here in Douglas County to make sure that gets spread around. I'm more than happy to put that on our work with my colleagues to put that on our advertising and information campaign that we have going here in the county. But I would ask the RTD directors present to focus on and think about Mayor Malay's comments about public safety. It's kind of easy to draw people to the free ride, but it's not the free ride that we heard from Mayor Malay is the problem with encouraging ridership. It's the associated public safety issue that we've talked about before, and we all have seen covered on the news. And so I'd ask the RTD directors present to consider, in the month that we have, working with public safety agencies throughout the district to probably vigorously address that in order to prepare to invite new prospective perhaps past riders to take those free rides in the month of August. Otherwise, I'm not sure we will get the result that we're after. To try to address Bill's question, however, Bill, I really think after Reimagine RTD passes, if the directors wish to then move into a planning phase that engages, other partners in the area, whether those are jurisdictional county commissioners like myself, mayors like Jackie Millay, get to some kind of actual summit, probably along the lines of the Mile High Compact model, where perhaps DRCOG can be a good partner, and perhaps introducing the idea of integrating that into DRCOG's planning in some way, shape, or form, because we have covered a massive amount of information. I've actually been really impressed. And by the way, I came on this as a very critical voice to RTD. I've been very impressed with the nature of the analysis here in Reimagine RTD. If we don't take that next step to turn that and kind of answer the question, Julie, you have posed for us on these slides, and I've talked about, well, we've got to set where our real priorities are. If we don't take that next step and establish those priorities that have buy-in through the population, and not just, we've heard the voices of all the special interests during this process. And if we don't take that next step to establish those priorities as a population here in the district, we've engaged in a phenomenal intellectual exercise that has certainly given me things to do many Thursday mornings these last 2 years. But if we don't take that next step, it's all for naught.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback, and thank you for hanging in with us these last couple of years, all of you. We really appreciate it. Mayor Millay.
Hi, thanks. First, I want to make everybody aware that Metro Mayor's Caucus has drafted a draft resolution that I'm going to ask our friends at DRCOG to share out with anybody who might want it in support of zero fare in August. My city council is going to be entertaining it on our agenda this month, and I would encourage county commissioners and other mayors or those of you send it on to your mayors and councils, asking them to adopt that resolution as well. But as far as next steps, I really feel very, very strongly, and I brought this issue up and I repeated it ad nauseum at the RTD Accountability Committee, is establishing those partnership opportunities with your local jurisdictions and counties are really going to be a potential game changer to improve the reputation, the trust, and the transparency within with RTD. So I cannot overstate how important I think it is to start having the board put together even before. I agree with George, the next planning phase needs to move forward, but I do think some kind of a set aside dollar amount for communities to creatively address mobility in their jurisdictions and encourage folks to move within their jurisdictions to the main RTD system, like the Link on Demand service Lone Tree has been providing at our cost, would go a long way to improving trust, credibility, and making people realize the value that they could see from an increased tax burden devoted to RTD. So, but I will also tell you, as a local elected, what I need to understand is, why should I have to go through RTD to get that money? Why wouldn't I just want to have my own local tax that I would have control over it? So I do think that's an issue that we don't need to go down that rabbit hole today, but help me understand why I should have my residents vote for a tax that's going to go to RTD, that's going to solve my local mobility. So if we don't have that connection between our local mobility and the RTD system, I don't think it's going to pass.
Thank you. Appreciate that feedback. Kathy.
Yes, thank you. I echo Mayor Malay is right. I mean, it has to be a partnership between RTD and local municipalities, you know, to work together. Now that we have outlined, you know, what the problems are, where we want to go. Of course, the question is, how do we get there together? I think that's a valid point. I just wanted to touch back on, you know, Kate's offer to, you know, for press about Fare Free August and things like that. I don't know. I'm new to council and I'm new to this process coming in at the tail end. So excuse me if this has already been addressed, but are you sending out regularly updates to all, you know, to city communications directors? Or, I mean, I'm one person of 9 on council. I'm the only one on this meeting today. I'm happy to share out information, but I think also if it comes prepackaged, you know, in things that are ready to go out, either that we can print and put in our water bill, how we communicate with a lot of residents, of course, social media, things like that, to help us spread the word without having to draft it ourselves all the time. And also maybe sending it to all, I don't know who all you blast it to, or if people don't want this, that it would all go to all council members who can share out on their social media, or to communications directors who then share it out to council members, commissioners, whoever they're representing and working with, to make sure that just so that it becomes a habit, so people start seeing more and more often, regularly, what's going on with RTD, what's, you know, where we are, where we're going, what it can do to enhance living in this region, things like that. I would think that would be helpful. And again, that's from a perspective of somebody who's just very new to this process. So thank you.
No, absolutely. And that's a great comment that came also from our meeting with the RTD board, sort of this need for, you know, determining what the next steps are and doing a very, you know, active communications through all local jurisdictions and things like that. So that's definitely something being talked about at the board level as well. It's a great point, Kathy. Phil.
I just wanted to kind of relate to people that, you know, Tuesday night at the board meeting, the Zero Fare for Better Air, which is the name of the program for the free Zero Fare August, was approved. So that you will start to see information, and I believe our communications department has started the marketing campaign, sharing that. It should be sharing that information with your local communication people. So I think that, you know, you will start to see some more information. We have some logos and some images that I think will help. We should be getting that out soon. So keep your eye out for it, and there should be information coming out relatively shortly.
Terrific. Thank you for that update. Other thoughts, other comments? Well, keep your thinking caps on. As you know, with any meeting, we would love your feedback, even if you have a brilliant epiphany after this meeting. Please reach out to any of us, to Holly directly, or Bill or Brian. You know, we want to keep this discussion going, and we really appreciate your feedback. We'll give everybody one more minute, see if there's any other thoughts. Well, you want to advance? We just got a couple slides. It's really scheduled, kind of next steps. Sebastian. So this is a tool. I don't know if we need to walk through, but we can click on it really quickly. So you guys were sent this out in your package, and it is an active PDF. So Sebastian, if you can click on it, this is how the final mobility plan of the future is going to be provided. This is an initial draft. We would love your feedback on, preferably by July 8th. And it's a fun, interactive way of seeing it. So it's sort of a choose your own adventure. You can click on each of the individual topics if you're interested in learning a little bit more about scenario planning. Here is kind of your scenario planning. Many of these have very detailed technical memos associated with them. So there's a lot of detailed information, or you can do it. You could start with step 1, setting the stage, and you could walk through the entire project as well. So it's really kind of your, how you would like to interact. As Sebastian's showing us, you know, here's one of our technical memos, for example, on district boundaries. We are still working on the final recommendations because we wanted feedback from the board. We wanted feedback from these groups. And so we still are working on kind of the overall conclusion of the final recommendations. But to your point, we've been working on this for several years. We've got a lot of amazing technical details and analysis. Really wanted this to be accessible and easy for everyone to access. So feel free to poke around on the tool, give us your thoughts, give us your suggestions. That 7, that black circle in the far right, that is the area we'll be finalizing here for the next couple of weeks. But we would love your thoughts. Yeah, so that'll be where the final recommendations are. But you'll a lot of this will feel very familiar to you because a lot of these are just the steps that we've gone through with you with the scenario planning, a review of the SOP, and gathering some of this information. So really appreciate your thoughts and any perspectives on any of the information and how we have it organized. And yes, to Director Williams' question, this will be available on RTD's website. So next slide, please. So I think just from a scheduling perspective, sort of next steps, as Holly mentioned earlier, we are going to the board on, I believe it's, if you go one more slide, Sebastian, I believe it's the 13th, that we're going to go and have the final discussion, the Operations and Safety Committee on the SOP with a hope board approval on July 26th. So we're going to put in front of the board for consideration. And then we are looking at getting this group together one more time in August after we've got final board determination on the SOP. So with that, I'll open it up to any outstanding questions, anything on the financials, anything on the mobility plan for the future. We can even go back to the SOP. Any other thoughts, questions from this group?
Actually, Julie, one thing I think we wanted to ask, and we asked the technical working group yesterday, is we have hopes that we could meet in August in person.
Oh, yeah.
And didn't know, I know that you all have busy schedules and didn't know if you would all be willing to come downtown for one last meeting. Again, we would provide some sort of food associated with the meeting, so it would be kind of trying to get back to where we began, because many of you here from the beginning remember that we did start meeting in person, and so we could do that certainly. The TWG was supportive of that idea. I just didn't know if this group would be similarly supportive or not.
George?
Hey, that'd be great, Bill. I mean, we've done a lot of work here in Douglas County to, get back in person as a part of our recovery plan from the pandemic. Making sure information is available so people can make their own personal choices to minimize exposure, because we do know that the pandemic is still in its perhaps long extended afterthrows. And so I definitely encourage that. My only request is we really start it just like we do it just like we started, and we make sure we fill out the forms to get the 6 inches of snow to fall during that meeting. Yeah, I know there's challenges there with August and everything, but that's the way to commemorate it. And Jackie just commented about how she'd love to get downtown, and I might even carpool with her since I have the 4-wheel drive vehicle if we could actually do the snowfall as well. But
one thing about meeting in August, there will be free fares, so everybody could take transit for free.
That is true.
There you go. There you go. But I am in favor. Consider mine a yes vote. I'd be happy to see everybody.
Terrific. Terrific. No, thank you. Absolutely. Well, we'll be looking to finalize those dates very soon. Well, with that, I think we just, as a project team, we just want to say thank you. This group has been phenomenal. You have gone a long road for us. This has been a really challenging project. Your insights, your feedback, your recommendations have all just been tremendously helpful, and is really helping us formulate this overall plan. So feel free to reach out to us. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your thoughts, as we kind of finalize things, as we wrap this up. But really, this project wouldn't have existed without you, and we really, really appreciate your time.
Go Avs.
Thank you so much. And we'll give you a little bit of your day back. You got about half an hour of your day back. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Have a great day. Go Avs. Woo.
Thanks a lot. Great job, Julie. Great job. Great job, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you.